Good morning. I hope everything is great in your life today and that it just gets better every day this week for you. We've been studying for the last few weeks in Deuteronomy chapter 5 as Moses regave or restated the Ten Commandments that God had given to the children of Israel back on Mount Sinai. You remember they were put in those two stone tablets written by the very finger of God. But first, God had declared them down very vocally from the clouds and the smoke and the fire from the mountain to the people. And they pleaded with Moses, go up and let him tell you, and you come down and tell us. Moses was now restating those before the children of Israel would enter into that promised land. I want you to notice a few things in this week and the next couple of weeks. After he had given them the Ten Commandments, some of the charges that he offered them. In verse number 22, immediately after finishing the giving of the Ten Commandments, he said, "These are the commandments the Lord proclaimed in a loud voice to your whole assembly there on the mountain, from out of the fire, the cloud, and the deep darkness." He added nothing more. Then he wrote them on the two tablets of stone and gave them to them. And then down at the last part of the chapter, so be careful to do what the Lord your God has commanded you. Do not turn aside to the right or to the left. Walk in obedience to all that the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live and prosper and prolong your days in the land that you will possess. This is such an amazing charge, it seems to me. God had taught them the very fundamentals of life together, about morality and about having the right kind of heart for God, for parents, and then just dealing with one another. And in that, God says it's vital that you follow, that you obey, that you live by these commands that I've given you. Don't turn to the right and don't turn to the left. Just follow the standard of the commands. What does it mean to turn to the right or the left? Well, typically, in our way of thinking at least, if I turn to the right, I begin to make restrictions that are harder than what God gave. I begin to tighten that load. I begin to add to the restrictions just to make sure. It's sort of like the old story where a guy was talking about building the road on the mountainside, and the road would run very close to the edge, and they built this wall to make certain that someone wouldn't go off the edge. But then someone came along and said, well, even though you've got that metal wall there to keep anyone from, it would be so much better if you built it just a yard or two inside that so that they can't get that close. And then somebody else said, no, let's build it 2 yards. Before long, it had gotten completely away because in the fear of just getting close, they were moving the standards further back. Think about how the Pharisees and religious leaders among the Jews, by the time that Jesus came on the scene, had added one regulation after another to the Sabbath law. It was a simple law. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And yet, they had given tons of restrictions about how to obey that command. They had gone far to the right in what they were doing. Let me tell you something. We can do the same thing with any teaching of Jesus in our day. We need to remember that what God bound, and in giving the apostles the keys to the kingdom, is still bound on us. But what he loosed is still loose for us. So if I go to the right, I'm trying to make laws where God never made any. If I go to the left, I'm saying, well, now God didn't really mean you had to do that. It'll be all right if you just veer to the left a little bit, and you really aren't required to live by those commands of God. Now think about it. How many times have you heard both sides or either side of that? So many. Look at commands that God has given and think, well, boy, if we just add in another one here about what you can do in this situation or what you can do in that one, and they make it so hard that no one could live by it. But then others come along and say, oh, you really don't have to obey it. I know Jesus said it, or the apostles wrote that down. Men like Paul said you had to do it, but you really don't have to. I wonder how God's going to take it in the judgment day with either side. Jesus looked at those Pharisees that wanted to make law after law after law, and he said, you bunch of hypocrites. You scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. Woe to you. He looked on them with condemnation. How do you think he looked on those Sadducees that wanted to release everything? You really don't have to do that at all. Let me tell you something. He didn't look on them with any greater kindness, because it doesn't matter which way you go. If you run off the road to the right or to the left, you're off the road in the ditch either way. And spiritually, when we go off the road of God's commands and make them harder than God made them, or say you really don't have to do what God said, the simple result is you're going to end up in hell either way. When God gave a command, he expects us to live by it. Now, he said to those Israelites, if you do this, let me tell you, when you go into the promised land, you're going to live there for a long time. You're going to have long life. I'm going to bless you with prosperity. It'll be a wonderful thing. But now think about this. When they went in and did the attack on the city of Jericho, and God told them, you just march around that wall 7 days or 6 days in a row one time. And then on that seventh day, you march around it 7 times and then blow the trumpet, and the wall will come tumbling down. And you go in and take that city. And they conquered the city of Jericho with ease. But one man disobeyed. A man named Achan stole from the treasures that he could find there. He took a talent of gold, and he took some of the beautiful garments that were there and hid them in his tent, even though God said, all this belongs to me. And the result was, when they went to fight the little city of Ai, they lost the battle, and more than 20 men died because one man was a crook. Listen, when one church member, one family member goes off in the wrong way and lives in rebellion to God, it affects the whole family. It affects the whole church. We can make excuses from now on, but God gives his commandments to be obeyed, and I'm to do it like he said.